Welcome back, everyone. Here we are, 9.9 endangered species. I know it's kind of weird. I'm doing this couple lessons of Unit 9, which is supposed to be at the very, very end of the year, but I have brought it up into Unit 2 because I think it's really important for us to be able to talk about these type of topics at this point in juncture in the course, as opposed to at the very, very end of the year. So, as I mentioned with the previous lesson, we're going to be covering endangered species 9.9 this lesson, and then our next lesson after this one will be 9.8, which is invasive species. But right now, let's delve into some endangered species. I don't believe this will be as long as the last one. I know that was a longer lesson for this to sit through, but I felt it was incredibly important stuff. This one is decently long in the number of slides, but I think it will go quicker because there's a lot more of just pictures and stuff associated with the slides. So what is the College Board expecting you to know? They're expecting you to, again, be able to explain. So they want high-level knowledge associated with this topic. Explain how species become endangered and strategies to control the problem. Okay. Sorry, I had to quickly turn back there to read it. Small font. It's not the cleanest, but whatever. So we're looking at why are species becoming endangered, and then what can we do about it? So again, this is the understanding of what you should know. Now, here's the problem associated with this. There are millions of species on the planet, estimated somewhere between 2 to 10 million species on the planet. Do you know every single, or are you going to be expected to know every single endangered species? Absolutely not. There's thousands of species that are endangered. Do I know every species that's endangered? Absolutely not. I don't even know a third of them. All right, there's no reason to know that. But here is the big caveat to that. Do you understand what it means to be endangered at the end of this? Will you know what it means to be endangered? And not only that, can you apply more universal ideas and universal concepts to those species? So that's where we are going. So let's talk. What is an endangered species? Endangered species is an organism which is experienced or is currently experiencing a major threat to their survival and their population. So if we don't do anything, then they will go extinct. And extinct is, by definition, a permanent loss of a species on the planet. I'm going to end this lesson with some like Jurassic Parky type stuff and like, is extinction for real and forever type talk, but it's not like actually, changing things. It's all right. Let me just ruin the surprise at the end. Extinction is not permanent, right? And we've actually proven that. We've already gone and brought species back from true extinction. So we'll see. Now, what are some of the threats? If you forgot the previous lesson, that whole HIPCO thing, yeah, go back and watch all 40 some minutes of it again. All right. But if you need a little refresher, a little just, oh, hey, yeah, that makes sense. Here are some of the major threats. Loss of habitat. Again, habitat destruction is the #1 cause of a species population to decline and therefore could lead to extinction. Hunting, poaching, a specialist diet, meaning you rely on a certain other organism, like kind of like a companion organism. But if that disappears, now you're going to disappear. That's why I've got the giant panda here, which forages on bamboo. That is the background to this slide. The idea that you could be outcompeted by invasive species, again, we're going to talk about that with the next lesson. And then specific or limited habitat requirements. So maybe you live in a very, very unique habitat, and there's not a lot of that around the planet. So those are the big things that are going to be addressed as to why species could become endangered. Now, who classifies a species as endangered? This is actually a really big deal. Now, why is it such a big deal? Well, if you want to build something and you're wanting to build or cut down a forest in an area to build maybe like a new factory or a new house, something like that, and there's an endangered species that lives there, yeah, you're not going to be able to do that. And that's really important to understand. It's not just like forests or whatnot, but it could be wetlands, other habitats. People have to go and have the property surveyed to see what species are there. And if you have endangered species living on your property, the amount of paperwork and the process to go and do what you want to do is going to seem very laborious. And it's going to be like, why are all these people trying to stop that? It's because there are actually laws now protecting these organisms from going extinct. And you, yes, I understand you're just one person and wanting to build a house, but by saying a species is near extinction or endangered, it means its population is pretty low. And so, yes, you're building just one house, that could be the last individual. So it's really important to understand. So, who classifies an endangered species? Because, again, incredibly controversial in what organisms are on there. Well, it's a lot of science. When you talk about colleges and universities and academia doing research on organisms, that research all contributes to life histories. So we start to learn more and more about an organism. When you learn more and more about an organism, now what you're going to be able to do is start to identify its likelihood of survival. And then you go and petition to different organizations like the Fish and Wildlife Service of the United States, which will manage the endangered species list. So it's a governmental agencies with a lot of independent research all collaborating together. There is also international studies and international collaborations, and we're going to talk about that for some internationally recognized species. Now, in the United States, it is protected under what's called the Endangered Species Act, and that occurred in 1973. Now, the ESA, or Endangered Species Act, it pretty much protects those organisms from their habitats being destroyed, from them being hunted, them being trafficked, and the people that are doing this will be arrested or fined incredibly high levels of money because of their destruction of this species' chances of survival. Now, under the Endangered Species Act, there are two different classifications. You are either endangered or you are threatened. And threatened means that you will become endangered if no interventions take place. It again is very controversial because it's now going to infringe on society. So you have a balancing act. We talked about it earlier this year, this idea of balancing all these pieces. And that's what the Endangered Species Act is really trying to kind of establish a baseline. And what it's saying is that these species that are listed under this reviewed and approved list are going to be protected. They are at highest risk right now in the United States. And yet you still have to balance out society in that people want to make money. We live in a capitalist society. People want to have factories and roadways and all these different things so that they can make their business work better. So that's another thing you got to balance. And then you have society in that people want to live in certain ways, in certain areas. And so you're balancing that out. And then you have ways of life that are being disrupted, like in Yellowstone National Park. One of the big complaints is that there's wolves in Yellowstone National Park, but those wolves were reintroduced, and now there's all these cattle farmers around there, and they're like, "Oh, the wolves eat my cows." And yes, but not like they're not going out and hunting your cattle. There's usually it's a weaker individual, or it's because you are infringing on their habitat and their territory. So there's so many pieces at play. And because people then get upset because they can't shoot a wolf that's eating their cow because it's protected, but their cows don't get the same protection, and back and forth and back and forth. And at some point, and that's where the Endangered Species Act probably became so controversial, is someone put their foot down and said, no, we are protecting these organisms. This is the protection. Yes, we are putting that wolf in a higher tier than your cow. All right. And that is why people, and a lot of people that really interact with the Endangered Species Act always are very critical of it. But to the layman, to the general person, it has done more for conservation than most other laws in the United States. So let's talk about some of these success stories. Probably the most famous success story of the Endangered Species Act is the bald eagle. The bald eagle, which is the national symbol of the United States, obviously a predatory bird. It is a pescatarian. It eats fish. And that is its predominant food source. At one point in time, in 1963, at the height of the use of a chemical called DDT, there were only 417 total breeding pairs in the entire United States. Less than 1,000 individuals in the United States. Now, There's over 14 to 15,000 individuals in the United States. I participate in a big citizen science project every year called the Christmas Bird Count. It's run through the Audubon Society. And what it pretty much is a 2-week interval in which people in North America, now it's going international, go out and survey and count how many of every bird you can see. And now you got to be able to identify birds to do it, but it's just a great metric and to establish and identify trends in different populations. It's been going on for almost over 130 years. It's been going on. Now, my area is over in the Penn Warner Club, which is right next to the Tullytown landfill. And we found an eagle's roost 5 years ago, and there were 9 eagles in there. And that's like a big deal. In the winter, find 9 eagles. You tell anyone, oh, I found 9 eagles. Well, these are people that grew up not seeing bald eagles because they're so rare, but their populations are rebounding. This past year, 2019, we counted 85 bald eagles there. The population is just exploding. They're all kind of wintering in this area. It's a long little island, a little forested island. It's about 100 yards, 200 yards long by maybe 50 yards thick. And they all just come in and roost and land in the trees. You literally go across with a spotting scope, which is like a modified telescope. And you just like 1, 2, 3, you're just counting. There's these large objects up in the trees. It makes it pretty easy to count, but it's incredibly cool to see. Like I remember when I was in your seat, I took AP Environmental Science when I was at Chamonix. And I remember sitting in your seat and, at the time my teacher was Mr. Bernarski. And I remember him saying like, oh, bald eagles, yeah, you can see them, but they used to not be common. And I was sitting there saying, but I've never seen a bald eagle before. And now it's kind of interesting. I'm almost jaded. I've seen so many bald eagles. Like, oh, I saw a bald eagle, over the weekend. I'm like, oh, that's cool. Yeah, I see them all the time. We see them actually all the time when we do our bird watching lab. We'll go outside. It's not like super common like every day, but I'd say every year we'll see a bald eagle flying over campus. And I could point out the students, be like, hey, there's a bald eagle flying over. And a lot of people have never seen a bald eagle before, but it's something to kind of be proud that the United States enacted a law to help protect these organisms. What we did is we really protected their habitat. We protected and we ran captive breeding programs to help reintroduce them and spread them. And it worked great. The gray wolf. The gray wolf is a major success story. Again, listed as endangered in 1974. And we've established areas. We've reintroduced them to Yellowstone National Park. And their populations are now close to 10,000 individuals. So they are rebounding very, very well, and they're doing well. And there's a lot of people that want to take them off of the endangered species list. The bald eagle everyone says like it's on the endangered species list and it's been taken off. What it has been done is it's been lessened. So it's no longer considered endangered. Now it's considered threatened or maybe just under watch anymore because its population is rebounding so well. And they want to do that with the gray wolf to allow people to hunt or at least protect their own property from the wolf destroying their herds of cattle or whatnot. The California condor is famous in that it's the largest bird in the United States, a wingspan of 9 feet. All right, so you think when you put your arms out, it's equivalent to your height. Well, birds are not the same aspect ratio. They actually, it's a glider, it's a scavenger. But what was happening is it was eating a lot of dead meat that had a lot of lead in it, and they were dying off. And actually, there's other stories of them landing on power lines, telephone poles, and because their wings were so long, when they would put their wings down just to land, as they were coming into land, they'd actually touch both ends of the wire and they electrocute themselves. But only a few dozen individuals remained in the wild. So they ran what's called a captive breeding program. And they brought them in, I believe it was a zoo out of California. I'm not exactly sure which zoo really started to run the captive breeding program, but they started to raise the chicks so that they would get to adulthood. And then they were reintroduced. And now the population is growing, and it's continuing to grow. They don't produce offspring very, very rapidly. But when they do, it's really important to make sure that offspring is raised to an adult. So that's what the captive breeding program is really designed to do, is to help make sure that they're being raised to adulthood. And again, the Endangered Species Act only covers the United States. Now, what are some international, and I won't call them laws because it's not truly an international law. There's not really anything that actually is international law. Yes, there's war crimes and different things addressed like that. But from a conservation standpoint, there are no international laws. But we have an organization, and that organization is the IUCN, or it's derived from the French, the International Union de Conservation Naturelle, but we just call it the International Union for the Conservation of Nature. So it really translates pretty well to English. But the IUCN was founded in 1948, and what it does is it establishes a list annually of species that are their populations are endangered. So to some degree, and there's different levels, and I'm going to go over them in the next slide. But this list they developed is called the Red List. So it's called the IUCN Red List. So the IUCN generates this Red List. And I just noticed I kind of skipped over a little section here, and I want to kind of come back to it. One of the things, especially for conservation and for protecting organisms, is the idea of flagship species. Now, a flagship species is usually a species that its population is declining, but it's something that people see, recognize, and acknowledge as a species linked to a certain issue of concern. When I say climate change, most people think of polar bears. The idea that these polar bears are dying and they're starving because of the constantly melted ice up there, and they're not able to hunt seals. So polar bears, the reason for their endangerment is usually due to a loss of habitat, but it's linked to climate change. We used to consider them a flagship species because we say polar bears and people can all rally around polar bears for climate change. Like a small little mussel or a bivalve that lives in the bottom of some tide pool that might be going extinct because of climate change. No one's going to rally around that. So there's a couple major organisms that are identified for, as flagship species, like elephants, when we talk about ivory trade and poaching and overfishing and linking it to tuna. So there's so many because these are the organisms that people will rally behind. They recognize and they care about them. Like when I say endangered species, most of you are probably thinking of the big 15 to 20 endangered species, the giant panda, the Bengal tiger, all the ones I've had pictures of so far. But there are thousands of lesser organisms that are equally as important to biodiversity measures and to ecosystems, but they're just not as famous. They're not those flagship species. So please understand that certain organisms are more of a rallying cry than others. And I'm sorry I kind of went out of order on teaching this slide. Hopefully you don't want to write letters to the school board to get me fired because of that. Back to the Red List and the list of levels of endangerment. And here they are. It goes from least concern, which means the population is doing well, there's no major threats to it, to near threatened. Maybe it's almost into a threatened category. And threatened really includes a couple of them. Threatened is a broad term from the IUCN. It is not like the United States Endangered Species Act law, in that unlike the ESA, the Red List does not just break it down into two categories. So remember, with the Endangered Species Act, you have endangered, threatened, everything else is okay. Now under the IUCN, you have least concern, population is doing okay, near threatened, but then threatened means to some degree their population is not well, and endangered is part of threatened in this situation. And then you have extinct as the other options. So back to the Red List categories: least concern, near threatened, vulnerable. Vulnerable means that their population can go to the next level, to endangered or to worse, if nothing is done. They've been identified as a population that's shrinking, and they're vulnerable to going endangered or extinct. Endangered, they're facing a very high risk. Conservation measures need to be addressed. And then CR is critically endangered. Very, very few population, or very few individuals of a population left. We need to intervene right now. Captive breeding programs need to be established. Establishing natural reserves and habitat protection needs to occur immediately. Usually we don't just find a species and it becomes critically endangered. Usually it's somewhere on here and we've been tracking it. So a lot of the times the data tracks back and forth. And then from critically endangered is EW, which is extinct in the wild. That's usually because it's now in a zoo. And There's a guy on Instagram. I would encourage you to go and check him out. He's running an operation called the Photo Arc. His name is Joel Sator. I don't know if it's Satori or Sator, but he is a National Geographic wildlife photographer. But he is now going around the world and documenting all these endangered species. And like he'll go to a zoo, and there might be sometimes it'd be like, this is the last individual of this species. Think about that. The last individual of its species. And he wants to photograph them so people can kind of see them. And again, if you want to check it out on Instagram, look for the Photo Arc or Joel Sator, Satore, and you'll see he posts, I think, every day like a new animal. It's kind of cool just to learn about and just to see different things going on. And you'll see a lot of them are just kind of bland organisms. People don't rally behind those organisms. But extinct in the wild means it's probably in captivity somewhere at the last individuals. Now, if it's multiple individuals, hopefully they breed. But there's sometimes where you have like 3 females left. You can't just force one female into being a male. It doesn't work. Now we know with some of our biotechnology measures, maybe we can do things with that. And that's what we're going to talk about at the end of this lesson. So what is extinction? Well, an extinction is the loss of a species on the planet. Again, that's the definition. Not all species are facing the same threats. They're not all going to go to extinct at the same time. Now, certain species can adapt. Certain species are better adapted into finding new habitats, food resources, food. They can get different materials and find mates, so their population is going to survive longer. These are usually what we consider our generalist species. But then there are also some that are very specialized into what they need. And if those habitats, those things go, then they're gone. The organisms, again, that we go back to some of those ecological concepts we learned in Unit 1, is that the idea of resource partitioning, the lack of competitions, conserving of energy, all those help organisms to survive longer. So oftentimes specialist species are at a higher risk of going extinct than general species. So let's talk about some of the major threats we see on the planet and why some species are going extinct. It's kind of like a little sad section of the curriculum right now, but I think it's something that you need to hear. You need to know why some organisms are going extinct. One of the things that we need to do is identify the specific threat to an organism. Some of those specific threats include things like poaching, invasive species, habitat destruction, among many other threats. Things like poaching is incredibly detrimental. And why is poaching so problematic? Well, poaching is the hunting of a protected species for some monetary value. And usually it's based off of something that is non-essential. And that's what's really frustrating to me personally. I see a lot of this is because of holistic medicine or just because you want to have something on display. So some people will have like an elephant tusk that is elegantly carved on display, and that's like a status symbol. Well, that elephant tusk that's on display, that elephant was probably killed in order to get that tusk. So it really doesn't do anything. Yes, you've got this beautiful piece of art, but at what cost? Could we have made it out of plastic? Yeah, we could have made it out of plastic, and you wouldn't know any different. But that's the problem associated for me, like with a lot of poaching. Poaching is commonly seen with the ivory trade, and ivory is just a naturally occurring compound. It's very similar to what's in your fingernails, and elephants and rhinoceros, their horn is full of ivory. Now, there was an emerging market for holistic medicine in a lot of Asiatic countries because they felt that the ivory would help to cure cancer. They crush it up and ingest it, and it helps to cure cancer. It's not proven at all. But actually, there's a mammal that is now the most trafficked mammal in the world because of its scales. So it's called the pangolin. Pangolin is I got in a couple slides, we'll talk about the pangolin. But yes, it's a mammal with scales that kind of protect it like a suit of armor. But they feel that the scales, when you cut them, dry them, crush them up, you can ingest them and it'll help you prevent getting cancer. It's not proven, but you have, remember, in like China alone, there's over 1 billion people. That's over 3 times the population of the United States. 3 times the population of the United States. And think about how dumb some people are in the United States. So I'm not saying Chinese are dumb, but I'm saying the idea of you're not being informed and you will go with other different approaches to solving a problem. So things like historic or ancient medicines, which don't have any proven success and aren't proven in any ways, but you read it in a book and therefore you think that's what's going to happen, that creates a demand and people are going to pay for it. And those with a lot of money will pay even more for it. So if you're very poor and you can get your hands on pangolins, you can sell pangolins for a lot of money. And so that's what people do. That's how they enter into poaching. And the best way to stop poaching is to educate people and provide them with another job to do so they're not poaching these animals. There's also the illegal pet trade, which is very similar to poaching in that you are harvesting organisms from one area and sending it to another. So here's a look at like the ivory trade and really what it actually entails, just massive amounts. Remember, every single tusk you see here came from an elephant. Thousands of elephants are slaughtered annually for the ivory trade, and that's what's causing them to become endangered. So here's a little infographic. It's split over 2 slides. It goes directly from the bottom to the top, but you can kind of get all the information to see how much ivory is actually being seized from illegal trafficking. So here we go. The ivory seizures in Asia from 1989 to 2011 in kilograms. So 41,000 kilograms, which is close to 100,000 pounds of ivory being confiscated over a 20-some year span. Again, here's another look at it, what they'll use. Now, the thing is they're actually going to be using large bullets to kill these animals because it's easier for them to just kill the animal than to stun it and cut the tusk off. And it's incredibly gory. I don't want to sugarcoat this, but I don't want to like scare you into thinking it's like, it's not pleasant. But often it involves chainsaws cutting off the tusks, and the tusks are like a living part of the elephant. It's not like they don't feel it. It's not like cutting a fingernail off. There's blood vessels that go into there. And so it's incredibly bloody when it's all said and done. Here are pangolins, the idea of what pangolins look like, and the amount of that a pangolin is worth. Ingesting the entire pangolin, which some people will do, especially infantile pangolins, or the idea of the scales alone, which are trafficked. It's incredible, and it's mind-boggling to see the number or the amount of these being illegally smuggled back and forth from country to country. One of the biggest problems with illegally trafficking animals is the corruption that sometimes goes way up. When we talk about elephants being slaughtered for their ivory, there was recently a bust in Kruger National Park, which is the big famous national park in South Africa, where they protect elephants, but there's a lot of poachers even in there. And they traced back the money and where the ivory was going to and who was benefiting from these elephants being poached. And it actually worked its way all the way up to like cabinet level official, who was getting money. The protector of the natural resources of South Africa was, pretty much getting paid to let people kill elephants in his country and then smuggle the ivory out. It's crazy to me to see how all this happens, and it's all corruption due to money. The illegal pet trade, and again, I don't want to make you come out to sounding like a bad person if you have a pet like this, but understand that oftentimes they are smuggled into the country illegally. Things like parrots are stuffed into tubes and just, tucked into any which way. Here are a bunch of baby ducks being put inside of tires, and people will drive on these tires sometimes. The animals spin around within. It's not good for the animals at all. It's obviously incredibly dangerous. Amphibians are trafficked in because people want to have exotic pets in their house. It's a status symbol. Different other mammals like primates. And then I'm sure you guys have probably seen it, but if you have not watched Tiger King, and the idea of illegally smuggling in tigers, and then the idea of breeding tigers for pets and whatnot. These are not animals meant to be pets. These are animals meant to be in the wild. They're not domesticated. Yes, some of them are, but again, maybe it's just a personal mindset. I don't agree with the idea of domesticating all these wild animals. So how do we stop poaching? How do we stop poaching? Well, poaching exists because there's a market for those items. If you stop the market, you are going to stop the poaching. All right, so you need to stop people needing that stuff. If we can convince people that cancer isn't cured by ivory or pangolin scales, or you don't need to have an elephant tusk on display, or maybe you have to start finding people more and more to get them to realize that they shouldn't be doing this. Or if people start to see where these animals actually come from, like the illegal pet trade, well, how are these animals getting into the country? Well, they're sent in shipping containers in the boiling hot sun over the oceans for days on end with no water or food, and they're just hoping that they survive. And maybe it's only a 50% or less than a 50% survival rate. And then you got to hope it clears customs, which maybe will catch some, but there's not enough inspections going on. It's so problematic. It's so dangerous. But it requires government intervention and collaboration and punishments on those individuals, but not on necessarily the people that are doing the poaching. The people doing the poaching are not the problem. It's the people that are demanding those items. The people that are doing the poaching are just supplying for their families. They're trying to find a job. If you were in a poor area and you were told if you could go kill an elephant, you would make a couple $1,000s when you're so used to making maybe $2 to $5 a day. Yeah, you would go and do it. All right. So you got to start to open up your eyes and see that it's not the people carrying out the action that's always the problem. It's the people that are funding it from the back end. Little TED talk I'd love for you to watch talking about poaching elephants and how to stop poaching elephants. Again, feel free to pause this video, click on the links, and go to watching these TED talks. Now, let's talk about other reasons why species are becoming endangered. I'm going to try to move a little bit quicker because I know you're probably tired of me talking. Invasive species are very detrimental to a lot of endangered species. They are competing and outcompeting those native species for resources. And it's all because people have maybe released pets, or some sort of freak accident has caused them to be introduced to an area, or deliberately with certain plants, like an ornamental planting in your yard, the seeds are now spread and they start to grow wildly in the nature. So it's all sorts of different things. We're going to talk about it in the next lesson, but this is a big thing where education becomes incredibly important to help eradicate invasive species. Habitat destruction, very, very problematic. All right. Habitat destruction, again, is the greatest threat to any species on the planet. We have to make sure we are protecting habitats, conserving nature, establishing laws, establishing areas and preserves for them. Just saying you're going to protect things isn't actually doing something. So make sure when you hear about companies that are protecting the rainforest, you find out how specifically. Start to dig deeper. Look on their websites. Find out how they are protecting the rainforest. Find out what they're doing to make a difference. And that is a big deal. If it's money driven, you have to provide some alternative revenue stream. If you can find some alternative revenue stream, you're going to help to protect that area. Here's an example. We have orangutans. Orangutans are under incredible threat for palm oil. Palm oil, which is a very cheap additive to most of our foods. What they're doing is they're cutting down the rainforest in tropical Asia, and again, the tropical regions where the rainforests naturally grow. They're planting Africanized palm trees there, which produce a bunch of nuts that they then ground down to get the oil from, and then use as a food additive. Over here is a very famous endangered species in our area, the bog turtle. Incredibly endangered in Pennsylvania. Lots of conservation efforts are being established to help protect it. I mentioned in a previous lesson that Costa Rica is really leading the way as far as conservation. They are establishing more land for national parks and ecotourism than anything else. And that is the key, this idea of ecotourism. Now, I don't know what's going to happen over the next couple years, but this year right now is very problematic for Costa Rica because they base a lot of their economy on people coming to visit and see their diversity. People go to Costa Rica. I went on my honeymoon to Costa Rica to see the biodiversity. Um, People go there to see it. Now, with the pandemic and travel restrictions, all those people that rely on tourism for their well-being aren't getting it. So hopefully, they're able to survive and weather this without compromising the environmental morals that they've established within their country. Another video for you to check out talking about how they, as a country, are establishing more land for conservation and protection than anywhere else. They have large national parks, all of which are beautiful. And if you ever get the chance to go somewhere on an awesome vacation, try going to Costa Rica, check out some of the national parks, see the wildlife. All of their guides have to go to college to get college degrees in tourism and natural history studies in order to be a wildlife guide there. So it's incredibly interesting to see a country putting conservation so far in the front of the everything else. How do we go about protecting populations? And this kind of becomes a little controversial to some people. The idea that when a population gets so low, what can we do to protect it? Well, hopefully it's in a protected habitat where it's not going to be disturbed and the minimal intervention occurs where all you really do is just try to protect more and more of that habitat. Sometimes there's captive breeding programs that are going to occur, and captive breeding programs are usually going to occur through some sort of academic institution, but they're usually working hand in hand with a zoo or an aquarium or a botanical garden of some sort. Now, a lot of you think like zoos and botanical gardens, aquariums, they're really, really bad. Yes and no. Yes, they're bad in that you have organisms that would normally be in the wild in captivity. But when I was younger, I didn't have a cell phone. We didn't have the internet. And so when I became inspired by animals, when I saw it at a zoo. So when I went to the zoo and I first saw a Bengal tiger like walking around, I was like, wow, this animal's awesome. And that inspired me to care about them. And that is the idea that zoos really are there for. They're for inspiration. And I hope that you have some intimate relationship with an animal that you've seen somewhere at like a zoo. But a thing about a zoo and why are they actually also beneficial is because when you pay that ticket to go into the zoo, you are also paying usually for conservation efforts. A lot of zoos establish major reserves and preserves around the world to help protect endangered species and to help protect the species that they have on display. Now, things like SeaWorld are different from zoos or aquariums. SeaWorld is a for-profit entity. That is completely different. I don't condone what SeaWorld does, but like Adventure Aquarium in Camden or the Philadelphia Zoo, I would give them money every time. I will take my kids there eventually because I want them to get exposed to these animals and to see them. Yes, it's something to watch a video about them, but it's really something else to see these things in action and knowing that the money I'm spending is actually going to help conservation efforts in the long run. Now, I kind of did a teaser about it earlier on in this lesson, but I want to kind of wrap up this lesson talking about de-extinction. Now, this, much like we talk about captive breeding efforts being one of the last-ditch efforts or last resorts, de-extinction is also a very, very last-ditch effort approach. The idea of Jurassic Park and pulling genetic information out of a mosquito that was trapped in amber is science fiction. But the thing about science fiction is it's usually based off of science and nonfiction. And it's just kind of taken to one extra extreme. And we have the ability, from a biotech standpoint, to de-extinct organisms. If you think about it, how does an organism go and reproduce? Well, you take, a genome from a male and a genome from a female or haploid cells, and you combine them together to form a complete genome. We already have organisms with a complete genome. We could just take that, take out the genome, put it into take out the nucleus, put it into the nucleus of a fertilized egg, pop that one out, put it into then a surrogate, which there's oftentimes, if there's a species, there's also similar species, so we look at elephants, there's multiple species of elephants. So if the African elephant goes extinct, maybe we can use the Asiatic elephant, something like that. Or, cheetahs go extinct, maybe we can use leopard or jaguar or another cat species that's similar to it. Or if we look at a woolly mammoth that's already extinct, can we pull the genome from an individual that was frozen that we find in Siberia? Can we pull the genetic information and put it into an elephant and give birth to a woolly mammoth and bring back the woolly mammoth? We can do it. We've already done it. Now, we haven't done it with species that have gone extinct a while ago, but we've done it with current species where we're able to take their tissue and cryogenically freeze it so low that it doesn't destroy the DNA, but it preserves it. And then we can, in theory, just continue to build from there. So it's incredible, the idea of de-extinction, the idea of Jurassic Park. Yes, in that science fiction realm is gone, but some of the organisms we can bring back. So video here, you can pause this, watch this video right here, and it's a video I highly recommend, watching this TED Talk. This is the final slide I have for this lesson. It's Stuart Brand, who runs a nonprofit to really try to bring back extinct organisms. Incredibly smart individual, pretty engaging TED Talk. Of the TED Talks, he does a really good job of engaging people and bringing them into the topic. So I highly recommend you pause this video, watch this video, the whole video inception argument, and learn about it. But if you are done, let me recap before you go to link. Click on this link. Species become endangered because of a demand for something or some destruction of their habitat. If we start to address why things are becoming extinct or why they're becoming endangered, we can start to stop the problem and then preserve the biodiversity of those organisms and then the ecosystems which they live in. So it's really important to understand that species, yes, there's different degrees of endangerment. Yes, different species are going to go endangered, usually due to their lifestyle. But there's things that we can do as humans to prevent this. And I hope that you, at the end of this, kind of feel inspired to do a little bit more. And again, maybe it's just making those sustainable choices, or maybe you're like, you know what? I'm going to find a certain organism I'm really passionate about and donate to a cause. And I appreciate that. I appreciate you taking the time to listen, and hopefully you approached it with an open mindset. Don't have that fixed mindset of not being open to change. Be open to the idea of changing your views to help society as a whole. If you don't understand what I talked about in this lesson, feel free to shoot me an email. If you know what's going on and you're looking forward to learning about the next lesson, that's fantastic. I look forward to seeing you with the next lesson, which we're going to talk all about invasive species. And I think you're going to kind of take away from it some other problems that we're dealing with here in our society and around the world. So I appreciate you taking the time to listen to me, and I look forward to seeing you next time. Thank you.
You like that lesson? I know you did. So why don't you go ahead and smash that like button right now. Go ahead and comment. Tell all your friends about how great that lesson was. And make sure you subscribe, because I'm going to keep bringing you AP environmental content that you're going to want to watch. Or do whatever else those other YouTube channels tell you to do. And with that, Maloney.